Hey, welcome back. Today we are talking about our final linkage institution, the media, and we are covering topics 5.12 and 5.13. Those topics are the media and changing media. In this lesson, you will learn what the media is, the roles it plays, and a brief history of media, and how media has changed over time. First, you need to know what mass media actually is. This can be newspapers, magazines, radio, TV, websites, film, books, whatever, anything that reaches a mass audience. When we talk about media, that's what we're talking about. Media is actually the plural form of the word medium. So when we talk about the media, we are talking about the medium of information that we are getting. There are several roles the media can take, especially in dealing with politics. The first of those is the role of gatekeeper. In this role, the media actually gets to decide what is important and for how long an issue is newsworthy. This actually helps form the political agenda. Our next role is as scorekeeper. And really, this is them just keeping track of who's winning. You'll typically see this during campaigns, during elections. They keep a track of the record and reputation of politicians. They help candidates get mentioned. But this can also come with a downside, the downside of the horse race mentality, that really it's more about who's winning rather than whose policies are best. The third role is as the watchdog, and this is where the press can be kind of adversarial to the government. When they're playing this role, the media is actually meant to keep the government accountable. It is in this role that the media can often be called the fourth branch of government or the fourth estate. They act as the connection between the people and the government. They tell the people what the government is up to. They keep us informed as to whether or not our government is doing what we want them to be doing. That leads us into government transparency. In this, citizens have oversight of the government and access to its records and information. And finally, you have whistleblowers. Whistleblowers are actually not members of the media. They are typically members of the government or of corporations. This is a person who exposes activities or information that is illegal or wrong. Some examples can include Edward Snowden or Deep Throat during the Nixon era. Just a brief history of American media. In the United States, newspapers were king when our country began. Those newspapers were actually paid for by political parties in order to push political agendas. The idea of having an unbiased newspaper was really weird for citizens in the early United States. Objectivity is more emphasized now than it ever was originally. There are two main ways that media influences us. The first is through issue framing. It's during this that they actually set the context, interpret the facts, and provide legitimacy to topics. So they basically kind of provide the background of these stories that become important to us. Then they provide agenda setting. This is kind of their gatekeeper role. They force issues to be recognized when they become important. There are three main ways that media influence is limited today. The first is through audience fragmentation. People are now scattered across more news outlets than they ever were before. And we are finding that people are able, through social media, are able to even dial in further to what they want to hear rather than the full broad width of the news. That is actually called selective exposure. And that is where people screen out messages that do not conform to their beliefs. If they see something in a news article that they don't like, they skip over that news article. It's not like having a newspaper and that being your only source of news. Then there's the idea of selective perception. This is where people perceive their desired message. Basically, it's the idea that really only the stuff that reinforces your current beliefs are going to make it in. Through selective exposure and selective perception and audience fragmentation, we really start to see this idea of echo chambers, where we only are around people who believe kind of the same things that we believe, and we only hear news that reinforces the ideas that we already have, rather than confronting them and challenging them. While there are a ton of media outlets, there's actually been a huge consolidation of those media outlets to large companies that oversee those individual outlets. The same news can often be found in many different sources. And with this consolidation, there's a danger that alternative viewpoints will be excluded. You can see that in 1983, 90% of American media was owned by 50 companies. But by 2011, it was really 6 companies. Media is biased. Think the idea of mainstream media, the liberal media, as you hear it on Fox News, or you hear the conservative media on MSNBC about Fox News or about Newsmax or OANN. This is called bias. It is, and it really has been used by members of the conservative side, but now it's starting to be used on both sides to describe outlets of the media. Then we have the idea of commercial bias. Commercial bias is created when news outlets favor stories that are going to produce higher ratings in order to increase their advertising revenue. Whether that story is really as important as it seems, they're going to play it more often because it provides them with more advertising revenue. Think clickbait. It's the same idea. Because of that, the trust in media has actually gone down. And trust in media is not just an overall thing. Depending on your political views, your trust in media will be very different. Let's talk about how media has changed throughout history. First, we have the printing press in the 1400s. Prior to that, books and everything else had to be handwritten. The printing press enabled writing to be multiplied and copied over and over and over very quickly and without much effort as compared to having to write it all out over and over. The first newspapers then begin to appear by the late 1600s. And this is where the Federalist Papers really kind of fit in. That's where we kind of start to see the beginning of the United States. It is through newspapers that many of the ideas of having a revolution were able to gain a foothold here in the United States. The radio starts appearing in the early 20th century or the 1900s. And TV then starts appearing in the mid-20th century. More and more homes throughout the middle of the 20th century really begin to have their own TVs within their home. Then we start to see towards the end of the 20th century cable news networks. So this is where that diversity of news then starts increasing. When TVs first came out, there were 3 stations. That was it. Now you have these huge options of where you can get your news. And there's news on 24 hours a day, whereas originally it was just, maybe in the morning and in the evening. Now you also have the internet, and you have blogs, news, websites, social media, Twitter, and that has led to citizen journalism. These are people who report on current events, but they are not trained in journalism or affiliated with news outlets. Social media and smartphones have facilitated the rise of citizen journalists. But remember, when you're watching somebody who is considered a citizen journalist, they often lack the rigor and fact-checking of these news outlet journalists. The change in media has some good things and some bad things. It takes less resources now to get information out to the people, and there is less cost to putting things in print or visual media. You're able to get the information out to people in ways that throughout most of history people couldn't even begin to imagine. We have increased points of view that are available for consumption, and because of citizen journalism, you are actually able to shape the story. However, there are some bad things. We've talked about the echo chambers, where we just reinforce the same opinions over and over and over, and we don't hear challenges to those opinions. And then there's the idea of the for-profit news, that commercial bias, where the important thing is clicks over content, where it doesn't matter what the actual story is, as long as you get those clicks. In this lesson, you should have learned what the media is, the roles it plays, a brief history of media, and how media has changed over time. If there's anything you missed, please go back through now and rewatch that part of the video. Then, go in and make sure to answer the summarizing question in your notes so that you can get a stamp the next time we're in class. All right, guys, see you later. Bye.